Launched in the early 1960s, the Boeing 727 was a revolution in civil air transport, being the first commercial jet airliner to reach 1,000 units built and becoming a milestone of the global aviation scene for the next 50 years. The Boeing 727 began development at the end of 1959, following the release of the Boeing 707 four-engine jet airliner a year prior in 1958. The Boeing 707 being the company's first jet-powered commercial model, and was itself a phenomenon in the aviation world with global sales that dominated all other potential rivals. However, one drawback of the Boeing 707 was its size and requirements for larger facilities and longer runways, thus precluding it from operating to many regional or smaller airports that remained solely the domain of previous generation piston-powered models, while the Boeing 720, which delivered a shortened fuselage and range, was developed as simply an interim measure to open up certain carriers to regional fields. Thus, in 1959, Boeing began detailed studies into a jet that would be equipped with new technologies, devices and systems that could guarantee a high rate of climb and descent, enabling several short or medium stages to be completed efficiently and economically. This new project being dubbed the Boeing 727, as the 717 designation had already been allocated to the KC-135 aerial tanker, from which the Boeing 707 scheme had been spawned. The Boeing 727 design was a compromise among United Airlines, American Airlines and Eastern Airlines, each of whom had developed requirements for a jet airliner to serve smaller cities with shorter runways and fewer passengers. United Airlines requesting a four-engined aircraft for its flights to high-altitude airports, especially its hub at Stapleton Airport in Denver, Colorado. American Airlines, on the other hand, which was operating the four-engined Boeing 707 and 720, requested a twin-engined aircraft for efficiency, while Eastern Airlines wanted a third engine for its over-water flights to the Caribbean, as at this time twin-engine commercial flights were limited by regulations to routes with 60-minute maximum flying time to an airport. Ultimately, the requirements of the 60-minute rule saw a compromise reached between the three carriers for a trijet, presenting performance that was greater than the likes of the twin-jet Sud Aviation Caravelle, as well as matching the 60-minute regulations, while also providing improved fuel economy over a four-engined airliner. The man behind the Boeing 727 was John Edward Jack Steiner, a long-time Boeing man who had joined the firm in 1941 and showed remarkable qualities that kept the enthusiasm for both the 727 and later 737 at fever pitch from development to delivery, these traits serving him well when he became general manager of the 707, 727, 737 division. In that role, he saw the company through one of its bleakest periods during the early 1970s, when following the 1973 oil crisis, Boeing's combined production rates for these models dropped to just 4 per month, Steiner leading a consolidation for the manufacture of these three single-aisle aircraft and managed to profitably produce them. In 1959, Lord Douglas, chairman of British European Airways, or BEA, suggested that Boeing and the de Havilland Aircraft Company work together on delivering a trijet, with de Havilland being in the process of delivering their own trijet model in the form of the DH-121, later known as the Trident. The two designs had a similar layout, with the 727 being slightly larger, and at the time would have employed three Allison AR963 turbofan engines, a license-built version of the Rolls-Royce RB163 SPAY power units used by the Trident, this ultimately leading to a brief joint venture agreement between Boeing and de Havilland to each examine the technology behind each other's airliners. Thus, Boeing engineers were dispatched to Hatfield in England, and de Havilland engineers travelled to Seattle, Washington, though this proved to result in a decidedly one-sided exchange of information, with Boeing being hesitant to share significant details with their British counterparts, while de Havilland were expressly open and candid with the design of the Trident, essentially handing the American team all details. The expectation of the de Havilland team was that the Trident would be chosen as the preferred option over the Boeing 727, with the British airliner being built under license in the United States for sale across the Western Hemisphere, similar to an initiative being proposed at the rival Douglas in Long Beach, with French builder Sud Aviation for their pioneering Caravelle. Regardless, the joint venture between Boeing and de Havilland never went beyond this technology exchange, Boeing having received levels of information from the Trident project that was reported to have heavily contributed to the final design of the airliner, while de Havilland received little in return, much to the chagrin of British industry observers. In 1960, Pratt & Whitney was looking for a customer for its new JT8D turbofan design study, based on its earlier J52 turbojet, while United and Eastern were interested in a Pratt & Whitney alternative to the license-built Rolls-Royce SPAY, Pratt & Whitney agreeing to go ahead with development of the JT8D, while Eddie Rickenbacker, chairman of the board of Eastern, informed Boeing that his airline preferred the JT8D for its 727s. Boeing had not offered the JT-8D, as it was around 1,000 pounds heavier than the Spey, though slightly more powerful, the Spey also having the advantage of being further along in development than the JT-8D, though in the end Boeing reluctantly agreed to offer the JT-8D as an option on the 727, and it later became the sole power plant. As for the fuselage, during the early design stage, Boeing amended the lower section in order to reduce ground clearance as much as possible, as there would be no turbines under the wings, the intention being for the cargo holds and service connections to be accessible from ground level at airports where necessary loading infrastructure was unavailable. Furthermore, additional changes to the previous designs of the Airliner would be the adoption of a T-shaped tail, with 55 degrees on the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer, a ventral air stair installed in the aft fuselage, and 3 turbofan engines mounted in the rear, 2 on external pods on the sides, located at a more advanced line than the central engine. The vertical stabilizer came to be called the heart of the 727 by engineers, as it was supposed to support the weight and strength of the 3 engines, initially with 14,000 pounds thrust, in addition to incorporating vital control surfaces, such as the rudder and the horizontal stabilizer positioned at the top. Boeing invested heavily into the development of the 727, both in the design and testing of the systems, components and the aircraft as a whole, with the landing gear, for example, going through the equivalent of the simulated effort it would receive in 110,000 flights, much more than the expected useful life of the airframe, while the fuselage structure was subjected to no less than 74 different types of stresses. Based on these pre-tests, the first Boeing 727, November 7001 uniform, was rolled out of the Renton factory on November 27, 1962, with over 5,000 guests in attendance, and had 150 modifications, including 1 to the mid-engine air intake, compared with the aircraft detailed in the original blueprints by Jack Steiner's team. Despite these tweaks, the project had evolved with remarkable speed, the Boeing 727 having gone from initial design studies to the first delivery to a customer in just 4 years, while from the official green light being given on December 5, 1960, to the rollout of the first prototype, it took only a mere 2 years to get the revolutionary airliner off the drawing board. As a cost consideration, due to its confidence in the design, Boeing decided not to build prototypes owned by the factory, instead opting to use aircraft already built to the specifications of United Airlines, one of the main launch customers, and such, after the program, the aircraft used in the tests would be handed over for normal use for the rest of their operational life with the client. Following the rollout festivities, 74 days and nights of intensive ground testing would take place before the first flight was undertaken on February 9, 1963, this period being vital to the entire future of the project, which by this point employed over 12,000 direct jobs, and many more in the wider supply chain were at stake. Finally, November 7001 uniform took to the skies on a cold Saturday morning, with test pilot Samuel Lewis Wallach, co-pilot Richard Lasoche, and flight engineer Marvin K. Schumberger in the cockpit, the 727 conducting its largely uneventful maiden flight in the company of a North American F-86 Sabre chase plane owned by Boeing, which recorded the historic moment. The only concerns illustrated for the 727's test crew were a brief series of stalls in the number 2 engine, while another slightly unwelcome occurrence experienced during this debut sortie was related to the slats, which did not close after being activated to do so, as the hydraulic system did not have enough strength to overcome the aerodynamic pressure exerted in flight, but both problems were overcome without much trouble, and the 2-hour flight was otherwise smooth. However, though the maiden flight generally had no problems, the test program proved to be a time of major pressure for Boeing, and would require no less than 4 flying examples alongside 3 ground-based cells built for destruction to complete, the first of these cells being used to prove the maximum load the aircraft structure would support, the second for fatigue factors supported, and the third for the measuring of flight loads and their set limits. One of these cells withstood the equivalent of 60,000 simulated cycles, which, at the time, was assumed to be the full operating life for a Boeing 727, though this has actually been surpassed by many examples, the fuselage being pressured on and off for weeks in order to confirm the robustness of its manufacture and the structural stability of the assembly, these sections being checked for fatigue, cracks and deformations as an outcome of the earlier comet disasters of the mid-1950s. Exceeding the reference values of cycles, testing continued on certain sections until a failure occurred, bringing to the program a more complete picture of the expected fatigue strength, with Jack Steiner often present during these tests and paid special attention to their results, the overall performance being more than satisfactory, and the 727 was never suspected of any serious structural problems, despite decades of intense use by operators around the world. For the flying prototypes, the original E-1, together with later E-2 and E-3, were fully equipped to perform, and in a short period of time were able to rack up hundreds of cycles and hours of flight, each in rigorous operational tests simulating normal operations and also critical or emergency situations, such as rejected takeoffs, landings with go-arounds, and loss of lift coefficient. Despite their collective goal, the function of each aircraft was different, with E-1 being used primarily for aerodynamic testing, E-2 for testing engines and systems, E-3 for researching flight loads and systems, and the final prototype, E-4, for operational and reliability testing. E-2 also being equipped with instrumentation for aerodynamic tests, serving as a backup to the E-1 if required. In addition to prototypes and structural cells, several mock-ups of systems created in the design phase were also used during certification to test and approve the Boeing 727, including the hydraulic and air conditioning procedures, Boeing being under extreme pressure to deliver the first unit to launch customers Eastern and United for the arranged date of December 1963. As delivery of the first units draw near, future customers participated in the final phase of the project, making suggestions that were analysed and sometimes discarded, such as a request from United Airlines for the 727 to be equipped with an arresting hook similar to that of naval fighters. Eventually, the Boeing 727 program would prove to be the largest project conducted by the company to that point, costing $150 million, or $1.275 billion in 2025, this being $20 million more than had been forecast at the start of the program, while all 4 test aircraft had conducted 512 cycles across 1,143 hours of experimental flight, on top of the thousands of hours of testing and safety checks, with only minor tweaks needed to be corrected and perfected. Finally, just under a year after the maiden flight, the first Boeing 727 was delivered to Eastern Airlines on February 1, 1964, working between Miami, Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, the 727 being an immediate hit among carriers across the globe, thanks to its ability to finally provide a high-performance airliner that could be operated into all manner of fields regardless of size. The 727 also proved popular with cargo and charter airlines, with FedEx Express introducing freight versions of the airliner during 1978, and would prove to be the backbone of the company until the mid-2000s, at which point the Boeing 757 was brought in to replace the type from 2007, while many other cargo airlines worldwide have and continue to enlist the 727 as their primary workhorse, though noise regulations have seen a majority of units in the domestic USA be phased out. In charter service, the Boeing 727 was operated by Sun Country, Champion Air, Kiwi International and Ryan International Airlines, mostly as second-hand units that form cheap but dedicated starter aircraft, while future mainstream carriers such as Southwest Airlines also used a clutch of 727s during their early days to supplement their fleet of 737 twinjets, with Southwest units being used between 1978 and 1985 and were leased from Braniff International. The 727 also proved to be popular with carriers operating from airports without paved runways, with Canadian airline First Air employing a 727-100C to serve the communities of Resolute Bay and Arctic Bay in Nunavut, with both Resolute Bay Airport and the former Nanisavik Airport both having gravel runways, and thus saw this 727 fitted with a gravel kit for the landing gear, while the high-mounted engines greatly reduced the risk of foreign object damage. For the military, the Boeing 727 proved a useful ally thanks to its aft air stairs that could be opened mid-flight, with the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, utilizing these aircraft to drop agents and supplies behind enemy lines during the Vietnam War, while in early 1988, the Iraqi Air Force modified a Boeing 727 by fitting it with Thompson CSF TMV-018 Cyril pods for ESM and Rafael TH pods with side-looking radar, this being dubbed the 4727, and was reportedly used as an ELINT platform during the invasion of Kuwait in 1990 and the subsequent Iraqi monitoring of coalition forces during Desert Shield. Furthermore, a dedicated military variant of the Boeing 727 was developed, dubbed the Boeing C-22B, which was introduced in 1963 and worked as a modified transport aircraft for government agencies, with this aircraft being fitted with a unique arrangement of leading-edge devices and trailing-edge flaps that permit lower approach speeds, thus opening up a wider variety of airports to the airliner, with 3 C-22Bs being employed by the 201st Aircraft Squadron, District of Columbia Air National Guard. The C-22B was also the workhorse of the National Prisoner Transportation System, a means of transporting convicts and other prisoners between various facilities, and was affectionately dubbed Con Air, the service commencing on August 20, 1985, and employed C-22Bs wearing a distinct white with either red or blue stripe, with the average cost of transporting prisoners by the C-22B being $199.94 when compared to $697 for a commercial flight, or $897 to hire a charter aircraft. The C-22Bs, fitted with 83 seats, replaced the previous fleet of 50-seat Convair 580s in martial service, with prisoners transported with their hands cuffed and their feet shackled to the floor with special clamps in place at every seat, while the toilets in the prison compartment at the rear of the aircraft were open in order to allow the guards to monitor the prisoners. The National Prisoner Transportation System would be replaced in 1995 by the Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, or JPATS, and C-22Bs would be used in martial service until the mid-2000s, at which point they were replaced by McDonnell Douglas MD-82s and later Boeing 737s. During the course of its production life, the Boeing 727 would give rise to two variants, the original 100 and the later stretched 200 of July 1967, which was 20 foot longer than the original version, though from these a multitude of derivatives would be created, including the 727-200 Advanced, as launched in 1970, which featured more powerful engines and an increased fuel capacity and MTOW, thus increasing the range of the airliner to 2,930 miles, or by 32% over the regular 727-200. Other variants proposed included the 727-300 of 1972, which would have increased the passenger capacity to between 169 and 180 passengers, while also modifying the 727's operation from 3 to 2 crew, while in 1977, a 189-seat version of the 727-400, with a fuselage length of 155 feet, was also conceived, but with the proposed removal of the 60-minute rule during the late 1970s in favor of E-tops, what was originally to be a new variant of the Boeing 727 trijet was modified into the twin-engine Boeing 7N7, which would later evolve into the Boeing 757. The Boeing 757 would prove to be the end of the Boeing 727's phenomenal run, as while the airliner had been losing sales to its stablemate, the twin-engine 737-200, for some time, the 757 provided capacity far greater than the 737, also presenting performance that matched the 727, but without sacrificing fuel economy, 727 production finally coming to an end in 1984, with 1,832 examples built. Going into the 20th century, the Boeing 727 would remain the mainstay of carriers all across the globe until the fallout of the 9/11 attacks, with an increase in fuel prices, lower passenger volumes, the continued use of a 3-crew cockpit arrangement, and a drive to implement more stringent noise abatement regulations, seeing 727 fleets drop significantly throughout the mid-2000s, with United Airlines retiring their 727 fleet in 2001, American Airlines in 2002, and Delta Airlines in 2003. As of July 2013, a total of 109 Boeing 727s were in commercial service with 34 airlines, but by 2016 this had fallen to 64 units in service with 26 airlines, while the last commercial passenger flight of a Boeing 727 would take place on January 13, 2019, when 1981-built 727-200 Advanced, Echo Papa Alpha Sierra Bravo of Iran Azman Airlines, operated Flight 851 between Zaydan and Tehran, rounding out 56 years of dedicated passenger service. In cargo service, the Boeing 727 remains a prominent fixture of the aviation scene across many parts of the world, as while once notable operators, such as Amerijet, retired their units in 2018, in South America, carriers such as Aerosucre continue to work 727s under dubious conditions on a vast freight network spanning South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. In terms of accidents, the Boeing 727, as of March 2024, has suffered 353 incidents, including 120 hull-loss accidents, resulting in a total of 4,211 fatalities, with the first loss of a 727 taking place on August 16, 1965, when United Airlines Flight 389 crashed into Lake Michigan, 30 miles northeast of Chicago due to unknown reasons, killing all 30 aboard. The worst accident involving the Boeing 727 took place on March 31, 1986, when Mexicana Flight 940 crashed near Maravito in the Mexican state of Michoacan not long after departure, as when the aircraft was passing 29,000 feet, an overheated tire exploded in the right main wheel well, tearing through the fuel lines and damaging the hydraulic and electrical systems, rendering the aircraft uncontrollable and causing it to crash with the loss of all 167 lives. The Boeing 727 has also been notable for a number of mid-air collisions, the first of which was on July 19, 1967, when Piedmont Airlines Flight 22 collided with a Cessna 310 light aircraft shortly after departure from Asheville, North Carolina, killing all 79 people aboard the 727 and 3 aboard the Cessna. More notable was the collision of All Nippon Airways Flight 58 with the Japan Air Self-Defense Force F-86F jet fighter on July 30, 1971, which crashed near Shizukuishi when 22-year-old Technical Sergeant Yoshimi Ichikawa failed to avoid the 727 during a training exercise and collided with the airliner's tail, resulting in it disintegrating with the death of all 167 people aboard in what was at the time the worst aircraft accident in history, while Ichikawa was able to bail out of his crippled fighter and survived, but was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment for negligent manslaughter. Another notorious mid-air collision for the Boeing 727 took place on September 25, 1978, when Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 182, on approach to San Diego Airport, struck a Cessna 172 at low altitude over the city suburbs due to the loss of visual between the two aircraft, leading to the 727 entering an uncontrollable dive and smashing into the North Park residential neighborhood of San Diego, killing 2 in the Cessna and all 135 aboard the 727, together with 9 on the ground. The 727 has also been involved in some more mysterious events, including the episode of D.B. Cooper on November 24, 1971, aboard Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a man of apparently calm and polite demeanor who hijacked the Boeing 727 while it was en route from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, where he demanded $200,000 in ransom and 4 parachutes under threat of detonating a bomb aboard the aircraft. After releasing the passengers in Seattle, Cooper instructed the flight crew to refuel the aircraft and begin a second flight to Mexico City, with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Though only 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, Cooper opened the aircraft's aft door, deployed the air stairs, and parachuted into the night over southwestern Washington, with neither Cooper nor his remains having been found, and his fate has never been truly determined. Another unusual episode was the theft of Aerospace Sales and Leasing Boeing 727, November 844 Alpha Alpha, an ex-American Airlines unit that had been grounded at Luanda Airport in Angola due to non-payment of up to $4 million in airport fees, when 2 men, Ben C. Padilla, a pilot and flight engineer, and John M. Matantu, boarded the aircraft on May 25, 2003, taxied to the runway and took off without permission, before flying out over the Atlantic and disappearing without a trace, the aircraft having only a range of 1,500 miles based on its fuel payload, but no wreckage or signs of the aircraft were ever found. The latest incident involving the Boeing 727 took place on March 31, 2024, when Safe Air Company Boeing 727-2Q9, 5 Yankee India Romeo Echo, crashed and broke up on impact while landing at Malakal Airport in South Sudan, with the wreckage colliding with an MD-82 that was also laid up at the airport after suffering its own landing accident in February of the same year, though no fatalities were reported. In summary, the Boeing 727 proved itself to be very much the cornerstone of modern short to medium-range passenger aviation, as through its incredible mixture of a practical but sturdy airframe, combined with exceptional performance both at major airports and short fields, this aircraft would truly be the point where commercial air travel was brought to the masses, and opened up an entirely new passenger market that would set the course for global aviation going into the new millennium.